The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Chicago courthouse, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. The air was thick with anticipation as people shuffled into the room, some clutching folders, others whispering nervously to one another. It was just another day in court, or so it seemed. Judge Evelyn Carter sat at her bench, her posture straight and commanding. She wore a black robe that draped elegantly over her shoulders, and her expression was calm, but firm. Known for her fairness and sharp mind, she had earned respect from lawyers, defendants, and even those who disagreed with her rulings. But today, something felt different. Evelyn glanced at the docket before her. Among the cases scheduled for the day was one involving Officer Daniel Hayes, a white police officer accused of using excessive force during an arrest. The defendant in question, Marcus Johnson, a young black man, claimed he had been brutalized without cause. The case had drawn significant attention, not only because of its implications, but also because of Daniel's reputation. He was known around the precinct for his short temper and abrasive attitude, traits that often put him at odds with the community he was supposed to serve. As the proceedings began, the courtroom filled with tension. On one side sat Marcus, flanked by his attorney and family members whose faces were etched with worry. Across the aisle, Daniel stood next to his lawyer, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His jaw was clenched, and his eyes darted around the room, occasionally landing on Evelyn with a look of thinly veiled disdain. To him, this wasn't just about accountability, it was personal. He believed judges like Evelyn were biased against officers like him, more concerned with appeasing the public than upholding justice. Evelyn called the session to order, her voice steady and authoritative. "We are here today to address the allegations made against Officer Daniel Hayes," she announced, looking directly at both parties. "Let us proceed with professionalism and respect." Her words hung in the air, though they seemed to have little effect on Daniel, whose scowl deepened. The first witness called to the stand was Marcus himself. Nervous but determined, he recounted the events leading up to his arrest. According to his testimony, he had been walking home after buying groceries when Daniel approached him, accusing him of loitering. When Marcus asked why he was being stopped, Daniel allegedly became aggressive, slamming him against a wall and twisting his arm behind his back. "I didn't do anything wrong," Marcus said, his voice trembling. He started yelling at me, calling me names, saying I fit the description of someone else, then he hit me." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Marcus spoke, rolling his eyes and muttering under his breath. Evelyn caught the movement and frowned slightly. "Officer Hayes," she said sharply, "if you have something to say, please speak up so the court can hear it." Daniel hesitated for a moment before leaning forward. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous," he snapped, ignoring the protocol of addressing the judge properly. "This guy is lying. He resisted arrest, and I did what I had to do to bring him under control. That's my job." "That may be true," Evelyn replied coolly, "but your methods are precisely what we're examining here. If you cannot maintain composure in this courtroom, I will ask you to leave." Her rebuke silenced Daniel momentarily, but it was clear he was struggling to contain his frustration. As Marcus continued his testimony, detailing bruises and injuries sustained during the encounter, Daniel grew increasingly restless. He scribbled notes furiously on a pad, shaking his head and muttering phrases like biased nonsense and playing favorites. Evelyn watched him carefully, noting his behavior but choosing to focus on the task at hand. When it was Daniel's turn to testify, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. Under questioning from his own attorney, he painted himself as a dedicated officer doing his best in a difficult situation. "I've been on the force for 15 years, he declared, his tone defensive. "Every day, I put my life on the line to protect people who don't appreciate it. And now because of some kid mouthing off, I'm being dragged through the mud." Evelyn listened intently, her expression neutral. But when it came time for cross-examination, she allowed Marcus's lawyer to probe deeper into Daniel's actions. The questions were pointed, designed to highlight inconsistencies in his story. Why had no other officers corroborated his version of events? Why hadn't he followed proper procedure by issuing a warning before resorting to physical force? Daniel's answers grew evasive, and his irritation bubbled closer to the surface. At one point, he leaned toward the judge, his voice rising. "You know, Your Honor, maybe if you spent less time worrying about these criminals and more time supporting the men and women who keep this city safe, we wouldn't be having this conversation." A murmur rippled through the gallery, and Evelyn raised a hand to silence it. "That remark is inappropriate and irrelevant to the matter at hand," she said firmly. "Stick to answering the questions, Officer Hayes." For a brief moment, Daniel looked as though he might argue further, but he bit back whatever retort was forming on his lips. Instead, he sank back into his chair, glaring daggers at Evelyn. The exchange left an uncomfortable pall over the room, a reminder of the underlying tensions that simmered beneath the surface. As the hearing progressed, Evelyn remained composed, her focus unshaken. Yet she couldn't ignore the weight of what was happening. This wasn't just about Daniel or Marcus, it was about something bigger. It was about trust, accountability, and the fragile balance between law enforcement and the communities they served. And as she watched Daniel's growing hostility, she knew this case would test her resolve in ways she hadn't anticipated. By the time the session adjourned for lunch, the courtroom buzzed with speculation. Lawyers huddled in corners, discussing strategy, while spectators debated loudly in the hallways. Evelyn retreated to her chambers, closing the door behind her with a quiet click. She poured herself a glass of water and took a moment to breathe. Though outwardly calm, she could feel the pressure mounting. Whatever happened next, she knew, would change everything, for better or worse. Outside, Daniel paced angrily near the entrance, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. His lawyer tried to reassure him, but he barely listened. All he could think about was Evelyn's piercing gaze, the way she had challenged him at every turn. In his mind, she wasn't impartial, she was an obstacle, someone standing in the way of justice as he saw it. And as much as he wanted to dismiss her authority, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was dangerous, not just to him, but to everything he believed in. The afternoon session of the trial began with a somber tone. The courtroom was quieter than before, as if everyone sensed that something significant was about to happen. Judge Evelyn Carter returned to her bench, her face calm but alert, glanced at the docket in front of her, and then turned her attention to the people in the room. Marcus Johnson sat nervously beside his attorney, while Officer Daniel Hayes fidgeted in his seat, his jaw clenched tightly. The tension between them was palpable. Evelyn called the court back to order and instructed Marcus's lawyer to continue questioning Daniel. The lawyer resumed where he had left off, asking detailed questions about the night of the arrest. He pressed Daniel on why he hadn't followed standard protocol, such as issuing a verbal warning or calling for backup before using physical force. Daniel squirmed under the scrutiny, his answers becoming shorter and more defensive. His frustration grew with each question, and his voice took on an edge of hostility. "You're twisting my words," Daniel said abruptly, interrupting the lawyer mid-question. "I already told you what happened. I did my job. If you don't like it, that's not my problem." The lawyer raised an eyebrow but didn't respond directly. Instead, he turned to Evelyn. "Your Honor, may I approach the bench?" he asked politely. Evelyn nodded, and the lawyer stepped forward, handing her a document. She scanned it quickly, her expression unreadable. When she looked up, her voice carried a note of authority. "Officer Hayes, please refrain from interrupting counsel during their examination. You will have your opportunity to speak later." Daniel muttered something under his breath, too low for anyone to hear clearly, but Evelyn caught the movement of his lips and leaned forward slightly. "What was that, Officer Hayes?" she asked, her tone sharp. Daniel hesitated, then forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing, Your Honor," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Evelyn studied him for a moment, then gestured for the lawyer to continue. The questions resumed, delving deeper into Daniel's actions and motivations. Each answer seemed to fuel his anger further. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the table, and his breathing became heavier. Finally, when the lawyer asked him about specific racial slurs witnesses claimed he had used during the arrest, Daniel snapped, "That's a lie. he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. The sound echoed through the silent courtroom, startling everyone. You think I'm some kind of monster, is that it? Because I'm tired of being attacked for doing my job? Evelyn's voice cut through the sudden chaos. Officer Hayes, control yourself immediately or you will be removed from this courtroom. But Daniel wasn't listening anymore. His face flushed red, and he pointed a finger at Evelyn. You're just like the rest of them, he spat. Always. Siding with criminals over the people who protect you. This whole thing is a joke. The gallery erupted into murmurs, and Marcus's family exchanged worried glances. Evelyn stood up slowly, her movements deliberate. That remark is out of line and unacceptable, she said firmly. You will show respect in this courtroom. Officer Hayes, or face the consequences. For a moment it seemed as though Daniel might back down. He took a deep breath, his chest heaving, and opened his mouth to apologize. But then his gaze locked onto Evelyn, and something inside him broke. In a flash, he surged forward, shoving past the railing that separated him from the judge's bench. Before anyone could react, he reached Evelyn, grabbing her arm roughly and yanking her backward. Gasps filled the room as people leapt to their feet. Evelyn stumbled but managed to catch herself on the edge of the bench. Her eyes widened in shock, but only for a second. Then, with remarkable speed, she straightened up and shoved Daniel away with surprising strength. "How dare you!" she exclaimed, her voice ringing out like a bell. "You are under arrest for contempt of court." The bailiff sprang into action, rushing toward Daniel and pulling him back. He struggled fiercely, shouting obscenities and thrashing against their grip. "This isn't over," he yelled, his face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this, Carter. You hear me? You'll regret it." Evelyn ignored his threats, her focus razor-sharp. She gestured to the bailiffs. "Remove him from the premises. Immediately," she ordered, "and ensure he is detained until further notice." As Daniel was dragged away, still yelling and resisting, the courtroom descended into chaos. Reporters scrambled to take notes, and spectators whispered furiously among themselves. Some cheered Evelyn's decisiveness, while others shook their heads in disbelief. It was a scene unlike anything most of them had ever witnessed, a police officer physically assaulting a sitting judge in broad daylight. Once Daniel was gone, Evelyn took a deep breath and addressed the room. "Court is adjourned for today," she announced, her voice steady despite the storm of emotion swirling around her. "We will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. With that, she rose from her seat and disappeared into her chambers, leaving behind a stunned audience. Inside her office, Evelyn closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a long sigh. Her heart was racing and her arm throbbed slightly where Daniel had grabbed her. She rolled up her sleeve to examine it, wincing at the red marks forming on her skin. For a few moments, she simply stood there, trying to process what had just happened. It wasn't every day that a judge faced violence in their own courtroom, especially from someone sworn to uphold the law. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Judge Carter?" came a hesitant voice. It was Laura Bennett, a detective who often worked cases involving police misconduct. Laura had been observing the trial from the gallery and had seen the entire incident unfold. "Come in, Evelyn," said, composing herself. She turned to face Laura as the detective entered the room, closing the door behind her. Laura hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Are you okay, Judge Carter?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. "That was intense." Evelyn nodded, though her expression remained serious. "I'm fine, Detective Bennett. Thank you for asking. But I suspect this is far from over." Laura nodded in agreement. "I wanted to talk to you about that," she said, lowering her voice. "What you saw today, it's not an isolated incident. Hayes is part of something bigger, something dangerous." Evelyn frowned. "What do you mean?" Laura hesitated again, as if weighing her words carefully. "There's a group within the department," she explained. "They call themselves the Brotherhood. They operate in secret, covering up abuses of power and targeting marginalized communities. Hayes fits their profile perfectly." Evelyn listened intently, her mind racing. She had heard rumors of corruption within the police force, but nothing concrete. If Laura was right, then Daniel's actions weren't just personal, they were part of a larger pattern of systemic abuse. "Do you have proof?" Evelyn asked, her tone measured. Laura shook her head. "Not yet. But if we dig deeper, I think we can find it. And if we expose them, it could change everything." Evelyn considered this for a moment. She knew the risks involved. Taking on a powerful organization like the Brotherhood would make her a target. But she also knew she couldn't ignore the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. "All right," she said finally. "Let's do it, but we need to be careful. If they're as organized as you say, they won't hesitate to fight back." Laura nodded, a determined look in her eyes. "Understood. I'll start gathering evidence tonight. In the meantime, stay safe, Judge Carter. They'll come after you if they think you're a threat." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Let them try," she said, her voice firm. "I've faced worse." As Laura left the room, Evelyn sat down at her desk and stared at the wall, her mind working overtime. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she couldn't turn away. Justice wasn't just a word, it was a responsibility. And Evelyn Carter intended to fulfill hers, no matter the cost. Outside, the city buzzed with news of the incident. Phones lit up with alerts, and social media exploded with reactions. Some praised Evelyn's courage, while others defended Daniel, claiming he had been provoked. The divide was clear, reflecting the broader tensions in society. But for Evelyn, none of that mattered. What mattered was the truth, and she was determined to uncover it, one step at a time. By the next morning, news of Officer Daniel Hayes' courtroom outburst had spread like wildfire. Headlines blared across every major news outlet, and social media was flooded with opinions. Some called Evelyn Carter a hero for standing her ground, while others labeled her biased and accused her of provoking Daniel. The incident had ignited a fierce debate about police accountability, racial bias, and the justice system itself. It seemed as though the entire city had chosen sides. Evelyn arrived at the courthouse early, bracing herself for what promised to be a chaotic day. Reporters camped outside the building, shoving microphones in her face as she walked through the doors. "Judge Carter, do you feel safe returning to work?" one asked. Another shouted, "What's your response to those who say you're targeting law enforcement?" Evelyn ignored them, keeping her head high and her pace steady. She didn't owe anyone an explanation, not yet. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Court staff whispered nervously in corners, and security guards stood at attention, their presence more visible than usual. Evelyn retreated to her chambers, where she found Laura Bennett waiting for her. The detective looked exhausted but determined, clutching a folder filled with papers. "Good morning, Judge Carter," Laura said, rising from her seat. "I've been digging all night. I think you'll want to see this." Evelyn gestured for her to sit and took a seat behind her desk. "Tell me what you found," she said, her voice calm but curious. Laura opened the folder and began laying out documents on the desk. "This is just the tip of the iceberg," she explained. "Hayes isn't working alone. He's part of a network, the Brotherhood, that uses its power to intimidate and control. They falsify reports, plant evidence, and even tamper with witnesses. It's systemic corruption, and it goes deep." She pointed to a stack of police records. "Look at these cases. Each one involves officers linked to the Brotherhood. Notice anything strange?" Evelyn flipped through the pages, her brow furrowing as patterns emerged. In every case, there were discrepancies, missing evidence, contradictory statements, or sudden dismissals without clear justification. "They're covering their tracks," she murmured. "But how are they getting away with it?" "That's the scary part," Laura replied. "They have allies everywhere, inside the department, in local government, even among judges. Anyone who tries to expose them risks losing their career, or worse." Evelyn leaned back in her chair, absorbing the weight of what Laura was saying. She had always known that corruption existed, but seeing it laid out so plainly was chilling. Still, she refused to let fear dictate her actions. "If we can gather enough evidence, we can take them down," she said firmly. "We just need to be smart about it." Laura nodded. "Agreed, but we'll need help. You're a judge, not an investigator. If we're going to make this stick, we'll need people we can trust." Evelyn thought for a moment. "Who do you Suggest? There's a journalist named Kevin Miller, Laura said. He's been investigating police misconduct for years. He's careful, thorough, and discreet. If anyone can help us get the word out, it's him. And what about inside the department? Evelyn asked. Surely not everyone is involved in this. You're right, Laura admitted. There are good officers who hate what the Brotherhood stands for. One of them is Detective Ryan Cole. He's been trying to build a case against them for months, but he hasn't had enough support. With you backing him, he might finally have the leverage he needs. Evelyn nodded slowly. All right, let's bring them in. But we move carefully. If the Brotherhood suspects we're onto them, they'll destroy everything. Later that afternoon, Evelyn met with Kevin Miller in a quiet corner of a nearby cafe. The journalist was younger than she expected, with sharp eyes and a notebook perpetually in hand. He listened intently as Evelyn outlined what she and Laura had discovered, occasionally jotting down notes. This is huge, Kevin said when she finished. If we play our cards right, this could blow the lid off decades of corruption. But it won't be easy. These guys don't go down without a fight. I know, Evelyn said. That's why we need someone like you. Someone who can tell the story without putting innocent lives at risk. Kevin smiled faintly. You've got my word. I'll dig into this and report back as soon as I have something solid. Just be careful, Judge Carter. People like this, they don't mess around. Evelyn thanked him and left the cafe, her mind racing. She knew the dangers, but she also knew the stakes. If they succeeded, they could dismantle a corrupt system that had oppressed countless lives. If they failed, the consequences would be devastating. Meanwhile, Detective Ryan Cole was having a meeting of his own, with Laura. The two sat in a dimly lit diner booth, speaking in hushed tones. Ryan was older than Laura, with graying hair, and lines etched into his face from years of stress. He had spent nearly 2 decades on the force watching as the Brotherhood tightened its grip. Now finally, it seemed like there might be a chance to fight back. What makes you think things will be different this time? Ryan asked skeptically. Every time someone tries to expose them, they find a way to shut it down. This time, we have Judge Carter, Laura said, and Kevin Miller. Plus, thanks to Hayes' stupidity, we have actual evidence linking him to the Brotherhood. We just need to connect the dots. Ryan sighed, running a hand over his face. It's risky. If they find out I'm involved, they'll come after you. Laura finished for him. I'm not going to lie, it's dangerous, but if we don't try, nothing will ever change. After a long pause, Ryan nodded. All right, I'm in, but we need to act fast. Once Hayes realizes what we're doing, he'll warn the others. The days passed. The team worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle. Kevin scoured public records and interviewed anonymous sources. Uncover people within the community who had suffered at the hands of the Brotherhood began coming forward, emboldened by Evelyn's stand in court. Their stories painted a grim picture of abuse and intimidation, but they also provided crucial evidence. Detective Cole, meanwhile, used his position within the department to gather internal documents. Late at night, he sifted through files, copying memos and emails that hinted at the Brotherhood's activities. It was painstaking work, but each discovery brought them closer to the truth. Evelyn coordinated their efforts, ensuring everyone stayed safe while pushing for progress. She knew the clock was ticking. The Brotherhood wasn't stupid. Sooner or later they would figure out what was happening, and when they did, retaliation would follow. One evening, as Evelyn returned home, she noticed a car parked across the street from her house. Its engine idled quietly, and the driver's silhouette was barely visible in the dim light. Evelyn froze for a moment, her heart pounding. Was this a coincidence, or was someone watching her? She forced herself to keep walking, unlocking her front door and stepping inside. Once safely indoors, she pulled out her phone and called Laura. I think I'm being followed, she said quietly. There's a car outside my house. Laura's voice was urgent. Don't confront them. Stay indoors and lock your doors. I'll send a patrol unit to check it out. Evelyn did as she was told, peering through the curtains to watch the mysterious car drive away moments later. Though relieved, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. This was exactly what she had feared. The first sign that the Brotherhood was aware of her involvement. Despite the threat, Evelyn refused to back down. She knew the risks and she accepted them. What she was fighting for was bigger than her own safety. It was about justice, fairness, and the countless lives affected by the Brotherhood's actions. And as long as she drew breath, she intended to see it through. The pieces were falling into place, but the hardest battles were yet to come. The days turned into weeks as Evelyn Carter and her team worked tirelessly to gather evidence against the Brotherhood. Each new discovery brought them closer to the truth, but it also made the danger more real. Evelyn knew she was walking a tightrope, balancing the need for justice with the risk of retaliation. Every phone call, every meeting, every late-night document review felt like another step toward an uncertain future. One evening, Evelyn sat at her dining table, surrounded by stacks of papers, photographs, and notes. Her living room had become a makeshift command center, where she and Laura Bennett pored over details late into the night. The walls were covered with timelines and connections scribbled on sticky notes, mapping out the web of corruption that stretched far beyond Officer Daniel Hayes. "We're close," Laura said, pointing to a cluster of names on the wall. "These are the key players: Hayes, 2 other officers, and someone higher up in the department. If we can tie them together, we'll have enough to bring charges." Evelyn nodded, her eyes scanning the board. "But tying them together isn't enough. We need proof they acted as a group. Otherwise, they'll claim these are isolated incidents and walk away scot-free." Laura sighed, rubbing her temples. "I know. That's why Ryan's digging deeper into their communications. He thinks there might be texts or emails linking them directly to illegal activities." Just then, Evelyn's phone buzzed on the table. It was Kevin Miller, the journalist who had been working alongside them. She picked it up quickly, putting him on speaker so Laura could hear. "I've got something," Kevin said, his voice low but urgent. "A former officer reached out to me anonymously. He says he has recordings of meetings where the Brotherhood discussed covering up cases. He's willing to share them, but only if we guarantee his safety." Evelyn exchanged a glance. With Laura, this was exactly what they needed, a smoking gun to prove conspiracy. But guaranteeing someone's safety wasn't something they could promise lightly. "Tell him we'll do everything we can to protect him," Evelyn said carefully. "But make sure he understands the risks. Once this goes public, there's no turning back." Kevin agreed and hung up. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, letting out a slow breath. They were getting closer, but the pressure was mounting. Every decision felt heavier than the last, and the stakes kept rising. Meanwhile, Detective Ryan Cole was navigating his own challenges. Working undercover within the department meant walking a fine line between gathering evidence and avoiding suspicion. He spent hours combing through old case files, looking for patterns that could connect the Brotherhood's members to specific crimes. One name kept popping up: Captain Alan Briggs, a high-ranking officer known for his strict discipline and loyalty to the badge. Ryan suspected Briggs was the leader of the Brotherhood, though proving it would be nearly impossible without concrete evidence. Late one night, Ryan found himself alone in the records room, flipping through folders when he stumbled upon something shocking. Buried in a stack of forgotten memos was a handwritten note detailing instructions to handle certain cases discreetly. The handwriting matched Briggs'. Ryan's heart raced as he snapped photos of the document, knowing it could be the breakthrough they needed. But as he left the room, he noticed a figure lingering in the hallway. It was Lieutenant Greg Morrison, one of Briggs's closest allies. Morrison gave Ryan a long, hard look before walking away without saying a word. Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. Had Morrison seen him? If so, how much did he know? Back at Evelyn's house, things were growing increasingly tense. Anonymous. Threats began arriving. Letters slipped under her door. Voicemails filled with menacing whispers. One message stood out: "You don't want to mess with us, Judge Carter. Back off or you'll regret it." Despite the fear gnawing at her, Evelyn refused to let it show. She installed extra locks on her doors and carried pepper spray in her purse, but she continued her work undeterred. Laura tried to convince her to take a break, even temporarily stepping away from the investigation until things cooled down. "You're putting yourself in too much danger," Laura said during one of their late-night meetings. "If anything happens to you, all of this falls apart." "And if I stop now, nothing changes," Evelyn replied firmly. "I didn't become a judge to sit on the sidelines while injustice thrives. If they think they can scare me into silence, they're wrong." Her determination inspired those around her, but it also worried them. Kevin, Laura, and Ryan all knew the risks were escalating. The Brotherhood wasn't just a loose collection of corrupt cops. It was an organized network with resources and influence. Taking them down wouldn't be easy, and failure could mean disaster for everyone involved. As the team prepared to present their findings to prosecutors, tensions reached a boiling point. Kevin arranged a secret meeting with the whistleblower, an ex-officer named Paul Reynolds, who had promised to hand over the recordings. The exchange took place in a quiet park after dark, with Laura accompanying Kevin for backup. Paul arrived nervously, glancing over his shoulder as he handed over a USB drive. "These are recordings from private meetings," Paul whispered. "They talk about planting evidence, intimidating witnesses, everything, but you didn't get this from me, okay? If they find out, we understand," Kevin assured him. "Stay safe." With the recordings in hand, the team finally had the ammunition they needed. The audio files captured explicit discussions of illegal activities, naming names and detailing plans. Combined with the documents Ryan had uncovered and the testimonies collected by Kevin, they now had a comprehensive case against the Brotherhood. Evelyn called an emergency meeting at her house to finalize their strategy. Sitting around her dining table, the group reviewed the evidence piece by piece, ensuring every detail was airtight. By the end of the night, they had drafted a formal complaint to submit to federal investigators, bypassing local authorities, entirely to avoid leaks. "This is it," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "Once we send this off, there's no going back. Are we ready?" Everyone nodded silently, their faces reflecting a mix of resolve and anxiety. They knew the battle ahead wouldn't be easy, but they also knew they couldn't turn back now. As dawn broke over the city, Evelyn stepped outside to clear her head. The streets were quiet, the world still asleep. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what victory might look like. A city free from the shadow of corruption, where justice truly served everyone equally. It was a dream worth fighting for, no matter the cost. She returned inside, locking the door behind her, and joined the others at the table. Together they sent the complaint to federal officials, setting in motion a chain of events that would shake the foundations of power in Chicago. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, Evelyn felt a flicker of hope. Change was possible, if they were brave enough to see it through. The moment the complaint was filed, the gears of justice began to turn. Federal investigators moved swiftly, aware of the gravity of the allegations and the potential fallout if word leaked prematurely. Evelyn Carter and her team had taken every precaution to ensure the evidence reached the right hands without interference from the Brotherhood. Still, the days that followed were filled with tension. Every phone call, every knock on the door felt like a potential threat. Evelyn tried to maintain her usual routine, presiding over cases in court and keeping her focus sharp, but it was impossible to ignore the weight of what she had set in motion. Whispered conversations in hallways and lingering stares from colleagues reminded her that not everyone in the system could be trusted. She knew the Brotherhood would fight back, hard, but she couldn't predict how or when. One morning, as Evelyn entered the courthouse, she was met by an unexpected swarm of reporters. Cameras flashed, and microphones were thrust toward her face. "Judge Carter, is it true you've accused members of the police department of corruption?" one shouted. Another chimed in. "Are you concerned about your safety after filing these allegations?" Evelyn paused for a moment, composing herself before addressing the crowd. "I cannot comment on ongoing investigations," she said firmly. "But I will say this. My duty as a judge is to uphold the law and seek justice for all. If wrongdoing exists within any institution, it must be exposed and addressed. That is what I am committed to doing." Her statement sent ripples through the media, sparking heated debates across the city. Some praised her courage while others accused her of undermining law enforcement. The division grew wider, reflecting the deep-seated mistrust between communities and the police force. For Evelyn, the public scrutiny was exhausting but unavoidable. She had known from the beginning that taking on the Brotherhood would make her a target, not just legally but personally. Behind the scenes, the investigation intensified. Federal agents combed through the evidence provided by Evelyn's team, corroborating details and building a case strong enough to withstand legal challenges. They interviewed witnesses, analyzed recordings, and cross-referenced documents. Each new revelation painted a clearer picture of the Brotherhood's operations. A shadowy network of officers who abused their power to protect themselves and silence dissent. Detective Ryan Cole played a crucial role in connecting the dots. His insider knowledge allowed him to identify key players and anticipate their moves. One breakthrough came when he discovered encrypted messages on Captain Alan Briggs's work computer. The messages confirmed Briggs's involvement in orchestrating cover-ups and coordinating efforts to intimidate whistleblowers. It was damning evidence, but extracting it required careful maneuvering to avoid alerting Briggs. Meanwhile, Kevin Miller worked tirelessly to amplify the story, ensuring the public remained informed without compromising the investigation. His articles shed light on systemic issues within the police department, highlighting patterns of misconduct that stretched back years. Though his reporting drew criticism from pro-police groups, it also galvanized activists and community leaders, many of whom rallied behind Evelyn. Laura Bennett acted as the glue holding the team together, coordinating their efforts and ensuring everyone stayed safe. She arranged secure meetings, monitored potential threats, and kept lines of communication open. Her calm demeanor masked the stress she felt, knowing that one misstep could unravel everything they had worked for. As the investigation progressed, cracks began to form within the Brotherhood itself. Lieutenant Greg Morrison, whose loyalty to Briggs had once been unquestionable, started to waver. He had always justified his actions as necessary to maintain order, but recent events forced him to confront uncomfortable truths. When federal agents approached him with immunity offers in exchange for cooperation, Morrison found himself at a crossroads. Late one night, Morrison sat alone in his car, staring at the dashboard. His mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Betraying the Brotherhood meant risking his career and possibly his life, but staying silent meant continuing to enable their crimes. After hours of deliberation, he made his decision. He drove to a designated meeting point, where federal agents waited to hear his testimony. Morrison's cooperation proved invaluable. He provided detailed accounts of the Brotherhood's activities, including names, dates, and locations of illicit meetings. His information helped investigators secure search warrants for Briggs' home and office, where they uncovered additional evidence hidden in safes and encrypted files. Despite these successes, danger loomed large. The Brotherhood wasn't going down without a fight. Anonymous threats escalated, targeting not only Evelyn but also members of her team. Laura received a menacing letter at her precinct locker, warning her to mind her own business. Ryan noticed unfamiliar cars parked near his house, their occupants watching his every move. Even Kevin faced harassment online, with trolls flooding his social media accounts with vile comments and death threats. Evelyn bore the brunt of the intimidation. Her car tires were slashed one evening, and graffiti appeared on the side of her garage overnight. Yet she refused to let fear dictate her actions. Instead, she doubled down, appearing at rallies and speaking out against corruption whenever possible. Her resilience inspired others to join the cause, turning her into a symbol of hope for those who had long felt powerless. Finally, the day came when federal prosecutors announced charges against several high-ranking officers, including Captain Alan Briggs and Officer Daniel Hayes. The indictment listed numerous counts of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. News of the arrests spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the city. Supporters gathered outside the courthouse cheering Evelyn's name, while critics condemned the move as an attack on law enforcement. Briggs and Hayes pleaded not guilty, vowing to fight the charges in court. Their defense attorneys argued that The investigation was politically motivated, accusing Evelyn of bias and overreach. Public opinion remained divided, with protests erupting on both sides of the issue. For Evelyn, the trial ahead promised to be grueling, a battle not just of facts but of ideologies. In preparation for the trial, Evelyn and her team reviewed every piece of evidence, anticipating every argument the defense might raise. They rehearsed testimonies, refined strategies, and prepared for the emotional toll of reliving traumatic experiences. Marcus Johnson, whose arrest had sparked the entire ordeal, agreed to testify, despite fears of retaliation. His courage buoyed the team, reminding them why they were fighting in the first place. On the eve of the trial, Evelyn stood on her porch, gazing at the stars. The air was cool, carrying with it a sense of calm she hadn't felt in months. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the sacrifices, the risks, the moments of doubt, and realized she had no regrets. Justice wasn't easy, but it was worth it. As she turned to go inside, she heard a soft voice behind her. "You're not alone, you know." It was Laura, standing in the doorway with a mug of coffee in hand. Evelyn smiled faintly, accepting the gesture of solidarity. "I know," she said softly, "and that's what gives me hope." With dawn approaching, Evelyn returned to her desk, ready to face whatever came next. The trial would test her strength, her resolve, and her faith in the system she served. But she was determined to see it through, to prove that even in the darkest corners of society, justice could prevail. The trial began on a cold, gray morning. The courtroom was packed to capacity, with every seat filled and reporters lining the walls. Cameras clicked incessantly as Judge Evelyn Carter took her place at the bench, her expression calm but resolute. This wasn't just another case, it was a reckoning. Captain Alan Briggs, Officer Daniel Hayes, and 3 other officers sat together at the defendant's table, their faces grim. Their attorneys huddled nearby, whispering strategies and adjusting ties. Evelyn opened the proceedings with a simple statement. "This court will operate with transparency and fairness," she said, her voice carrying authority. "What happens here today will set a precedent not just for this city but for the entire nation." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The prosecution wasted no time presenting its case. They started with Marcus Johnson, whose testimony painted a vivid picture of the night he was arrested. He described how Daniel had approached him aggressively, ignored his questions, and used unnecessary force. His voice trembled as he recounted the humiliation and fear he felt, but he held steady under cross-examination. When asked why he had come forward despite the risks, Marcus looked directly at the jury. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. Next came Detective Ryan Cole, who detailed his findings about the Brotherhood. Using charts and documents, he explained how the group operated, manipulating evidence and intimidating witnesses to protect its members. His testimony was methodical, leaving little room for doubt. At one point, he turned to Briggs and Hayes, his tone unwavering. "These men didn't act alone," he said. "They were part of a system that prioritized power over justice." Lieutenant Greg Morrison followed, his presence adding weight to the prosecution's case. Though visibly nervous, he spoke clearly, recounting private conversations and meetings where plans to cover up misconduct were discussed. When shown transcripts of encrypted messages, Morrison identified voices and confirmed their content. His cooperation dealt a significant blow to the defense, which struggled to discredit him without appearing desperate. Kevin Miller rounded out the prosecution's lineup, providing context for the broader implications of the case. Through photographs, articles, and witness accounts, he illustrated how the Brotherhood's actions had eroded trust between law enforcement and marginalized communities. His closing remarks struck a chord with the audience. "This isn't just about a few bad apples," he said. "It's about a culture of abuse that has gone unchecked for far too long." The defense fought back fiercely, arguing that the prosecution's case relied on circumstantial evidence and unreliable witnesses. They attacked Marcus's credibility, questioning whether his account could be trusted. They dismissed Morrison, as a disgruntled officer seeking revenge and accused Evelyn of bias, claiming she had orchestrated the investigation to further her own agenda. Briggs himself took the stand, portraying himself as a dedicated leader unfairly targeted by outsiders. "I've spent my career protecting this city," he declared, his voice steady. "If mistakes were made, they were made in the pursuit of justice, not corruption." But under relentless questioning from the prosecution, cracks began to show. Contradictions in his story emerged, and his attempts to downplay damning evidence only made him appear evasive. Daniel Hayes, however, proved to be the defense's weakest link. When called to testify, he grew defensive, lashing out at prosecutors and accusing them of twisting facts. His temper flared repeatedly, drawing admonishments from Evelyn and shaking the jury's confidence in his innocence. By the end of his testimony, even some of his supporters seemed unsure. As closing arguments approached, tensions reached a fever pitch. Outside the courthouse, protests continued, with crowds chanting slogans both for and against the defendants. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Everyone knew the verdict would have far-reaching consequences. The prosecution delivered its final statement with passion and precision. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," their lead attorney began, "this is not a case about individual wrongdoing. It's about accountability for those who abuse their power and those who enable them. Convicting these men won't solve all our problems, but it will send a message. No one is above the law." The defense countered with a plea for leniency, urging the jury to consider the pressures faced by police officers. "These men are human beings," their attorney argued. "They're not perfect, but neither is anyone else. To convict them based on speculation and hearsay would be a grave injustice." When the jury retired to deliberate, the waiting game began. Hours stretched into days as lawyers, defendants, and spectators waited anxiously for a decision. Evelyn returned to her chambers, finding solace in quiet reflection. She thought about the sacrifices made along the way, the sleepless nights, the threats, the moments of doubt, and reminded herself why she had persevered. Finally, the jury reached a verdict. When the foreperson stood to deliver it, the courtroom fell silent. One by one, the charges were read aloud, guilty on all counts. Gasps erupted from the gallery as cheers broke out among Marcus's family and supporters. Tears streamed down Evelyn's face as she banged her gavel, declaring the trial adjourned. In the aftermath, the city wrestled with the implications of the verdict. Some hailed it as a victory for justice, while others warned of strained relations between police and the public. For Evelyn, the fight wasn't over. She knew dismantling the Brotherhood was only the first step toward lasting change. That evening, Evelyn addressed a crowd gathered outside the courthouse. Standing beneath floodlights, she spoke with conviction. "Today we took a stand against corruption," she said. "But let us not forget that justice requires more than convictions. It demands vigilance, compassion, and a commitment to rebuilding trust. We must hold ourselves accountable, to each other, to our communities, and to the ideals we claim to uphold." Her words resonated deeply, inspiring hope in those who heard them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city, Evelyn walked away from the podium, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The battle may have been won, but the war for true justice was far from finished, and Evelyn intended to lead the charge.